It was a Saturday afternoon, and unbeknown to us, the Irish terrorist group had planted a bomb in the restaurant. It was called the Abercorn. At 4 p.m, the bomb went off with devastating consequences. The roof collapsed, the shards of glass everywhere. I was 4 years old at the time. It took 5 years of recovery, physically and mentally, to recover from that. So I couldn't sleep. The moment I went to sleep, I was back there again. I was back at the scene.
Did that create some sort of resilience in you that you later called upon in your later life?
I reject the whole victim theory. This is what's happened, this is what we do with it, and what do we learn from it, and what does this make possible? If you take an acorn and you plant it in a pot, that tree will only grow to a certain size. If you take the same acorn and you plant it in a field, it will become a giant oak tree. And she said, it's time for you to go and plant yourself in a field. I had no connections, no money, and no education, but the one thing I could do was work.
At what point did you step away from that or have an idea, this kind of entrepreneurship journey, thinking about maybe I could do this for myself?
Phone went off like a tap, just gone. Nobody was inquiring. The business literally went from hundreds of inquiries to almost zero. And I ended up sat on the beach in West-super-Mare in this clapped out old BMW, thinking, that's it, life's over, I've lost everything, I'm humiliated, I'm a failure, how could this possibly happen? I felt sorry for myself, and I realized that no matter what happens to you, there's always a new tomorrow. You're always going to bounce back.
Andrew Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Andrew, when I have these conversations, I always like to go back to what I call the origin story, the early days. Clearly, you've had great success in your entrepreneurial career, but it wasn't always like that. I was doing a bit of research about you, and your sort of early days were quite challenging, shall we say. Can you tell us a bit about your early stages, your upbringing and your childhood?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Belfast, and that was in the early 70s. And Northern Ireland at that time wasn't the best place on earth to be. Obviously, we had the Northern Ireland troubles at the time, and that was a conflict between Catholics and Protestants. It was quite a religious divide. So growing up in that environment was a very tough gig, because it was very violent. And when I was 4 years old, I was with my brother, and who was older than I, and it was a Saturday afternoon. We were out shopping, out for a treat, and he took me to a cafe for some chips and a Coke or whatever you do when you're 4 years old, some ice cream, and unbeknown to us, the Irish terrorist group had planted a bomb in the restaurant. It was called the Abercorn. And at 4 p.m, the bomb went off with devastating consequences. So it was one of the worst atrocities, actually, of the Troubles back then. It was 1973. It was really the height of the Troubles. And, it was devastating. Hundreds of people were affected. The impact of it was enormous. The restaurant, the roof collapsed, the shards of glass everywhere. I was 4 years old at the time. So rushed to hospital, and I was one of the lucky ones to survive and make a physical recovery from that. But it took 5 years of recovery, physically and mentally, to recover from that.
Wow. What a story. Obviously, I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, I'm the age that I remember I was growing up in Scotland, and of course we were hearing a lot of that stuff coming over. So really difficult time for anyone involved. So sorry to hear about that early upbringing. Look, it's an obvious question. Forgive me for asking it, but that was obviously you're very young. But did that create some sort of resilience in you that you later called upon in your later life? Because that was obviously a huge challenge for a little kid, really.
I think at that time it had probably the opposite effect, really. I became a complete introvert. For the next 5 years after that, I didn't really do school particularly well. I couldn't really connect with people. I had nightmares and night tremors for years and years and years. So I couldn't sleep. The moment I went to sleep, I was back there again. I was back at the scene. So, I had to be tranquilized, and I had to have a lot of medical care, physically and mainly mentally, for a number of years. So that obviously shapes you. So while all the other kids at school were playing, I wasn't in that frame of mind. I wasn't sleeping properly. So I think for 5 years, I became very introverted, couldn't really connect well. And, that definitely shaped my later years. That definitely shaped my teens. And when I was 18, there was the terrorism at that time impacted everybody. If you were in Northern Ireland or you were in Belfast, you were impacted in some way. And so I think when I was 18, my mother sat down with me and she told me quite an impactful story. And that story was, if you take an acorn and you plant it in a pot, that tree will only grow to a certain size. If you take the same acorn and you plant it in a field, it'll become a giant oak tree. And she said, it's time for you to go and plant yourself in a field. So you are on a plane and you're out of this country and you're going to go to London, and you're going to start all over, and you're going to plant that acorn in a new field. And so when I was 18, it was a one-way flight over to London.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So that is it. That's one of these moments, I think, in life that we all have. It's like a fork in the road, isn't it? Because
Yes.
you could have carried on living there in Belfast, but you chose, with your mum's support and advice, to get out of there.
Yeah. I dread to think, Alan, what would have happened if I stayed in Belfast, because you end up, if that's your environment and that's all you know, you become part of that problem.
Yeah.
And, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. The terrorism increased, the violence increased, and it was getting so out of hand, so out of scale, that nobody really knew what good was anymore, what it was like to be a good person, because the violence was just everywhere. I think, I can't remember what the numbers were, but, there was thousands and thousands of bombs. Yeah. There was tens of thousands of shots fired. And I think when that becomes who you are and that becomes part of your culture, you become part of it.
Yeah.
So, I'm very glad, very thankful actually to my mother for saying, get out of here. So, I landed in London then when I was 18, but, that brought its own challenges with the Belfast accent in London at that time, because,
I suppose so. Just people relating that to the troubles in Belfast, and then there you were speaking like a Belfast person in London.
Yeah. And, there was terrorism going on in the mainland then, there was the Brighton bomb, there was Harrods bomb, this was all going on.
Yeah.
But you know what, it's, I look back now and I think, well, if all of that hadn't have happened, if I hadn't had that experience, I wouldn't be the person that I am today, because, I reject the whole victim theory. And I say, look, this is what's happened, this is what we do with it, and what do we learn from it, and what does this make possible? So I think for me, when I landed in London, I realized I had no education, because school didn't really work for me. I had no money at all, and I had no connections. So, I was very fortunate. I had 2 older brothers that were living in England at the time. So at least that gave me a little start, at least a base anyway, reference point. But I had no connections, no money, and no education. But the one thing that I could do was work. And I made a decision when I was 18 or 19 years old that I would just outwork everybody. And that philosophy has stood by me ever since.
I love that. And that's an ideal way to, when you're facing challenges like no money, no job, no connections, I'll work. The one thing you have got real control over is your effort and your energy that you go into work. So what sort of work did you do when you first came over here?
Well, I was very fortunate. My brother ran a very small business, small printing business. So he gave me a start for a few weeks. So I worked for him, and that just enabled me to get a foothold and our starting point to go out to look for a job. And that's what I did, Alan. And I literally went out knocking doors. And I finally knocked the door off of a business in St. Albans. And this gentleman, Ray, who owned this business, said, "Do you know anything about computers, son?" And I said, "I do. Actually, I know quite a bit about computers." And he said, "Well, we've just got one. We don't know what to do with it." And it was a glass business, and they manufactured double glazing. And they decided it was time to get into the computer world. This was in mid-80s, 86, 80, 87. And so they bought this computer. They had no idea what to do with it. And so I thought, well, look, I do. So, but what I didn't know was their business. So I knew how to use a computer. I didn't know their business. So he offered me the job. I jumped on it. And to be able to develop what they needed to do with their computer systems, I needed to learn the business. And I immersed myself in it. So I worked day and night in that business, at 18 years old. I went into the factory at weekends. I learned how to cut glass. I learned how to make double glazing. I learned how to store it, how to load it in a van. So I learned all of this stuff. And then I was able to take that back and then understand and comprehend how the computer was supposed to operate, what it was supposed to do, how it was supposed to process orders, optimize production, organize deliveries. So that was very impactful for me. And at 19 years old, suddenly I found myself getting promoted. And by 20 years old, I was then general manager of that business. And, I had a factory full of people reporting to me. I had office staff reporting to me when I was 20 years old. And that philosophy, that immersion, whatever I'm going to do, I've got to learn it inside out. And work ethic has really stayed with me ever since.
Do you know, I find that fascinating. And I mean, it's a great story anyway, but just me reflecting on where we are right now in 2026 with this tidal wave, this tsunami of AI coming down the line. And there's a lot of people talking about, well, it's going to take away jobs. And particularly for younger people, as you were at the time, those sort of early stage roles, which the computer, the technology can now do. And so, but what I've thought, and your story backs it up, is if you add value, if you offer value to any employer, you'll get hired.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
That's the thing. So I would imagine if there was a 19 or a 20-year-old right now who was trying to get into work, if they did two things: one, really understood technology, like you understood computers back in those days. If you really understand this, all the issues around AI, and then understand the business that you want to work in, and really spend time to lift the lid and know how the whole thing works. I think you've got a pretty decent chance of being hired by the right company.
I think you're absolutely right. It's really interesting as an employer, and I've employed thousands of people over the years. If you've got two employees and they both do a good job, but one turns up and does just what's required and goes home, and one turns up and goes the extra mile, adds value, stays a little bit later, pushes a little bit more, learns a little bit more about the business, it's that one I'm going to develop in the business. And that's just a harsh reality. So, and it's right. It's about value that you add, but it's also about commitment and passion and wanting to learn and progress. So, I really back my employees who go the extra mile. I really, really back them. I invest in them. I develop them. I push them. It hasn't always worked, because sometimes you realize in life, not everybody wants to be pushed. Not everybody wants to progress. Not everybody wants to be the manager or a leader. Some people actually just want to go to work, earn their money, go home and look after their family. So you do have to get a balance.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because I can relate to that in my same sort of age, working in a big corporate. And everyone leaves at 5 p.m. and you get sort of knocked over in the traffic as people leaving.
Yes.
And the thing is about being young is most people, I wasn't married, didn't have kids. And I thought, well, what else am I going to do? So I would stay late in the evening, just understanding the business, reading and looking around. Yeah. And people would say, you can go home now. And I thought, well, I know, thank you, but I don't need to. I don't want to, because what am I going to do? Go home, go to the gym, watch TV. So I might as well stay. Yeah. But based on what you said, you think that's just in the person's DNA. Yeah. As they show up, someone wants to progress. Yeah. And others are happy with a 9 to 5 and get home.
Yeah, I do think one of the factors is, A, do I enjoy what I do? Yeah. And B, the work that I'm doing, do I understand the outcome of it? Do I understand the meaning behind it? And if I don't, If I don't really know where this fits within the whole framework, then I'm less inclined to do that. But when I know what I'm doing has an impact and benefits, I get a real sense of achievement from that. And I think the people that work for me now, who, and I'm very fortunate in my group of companies that we've got very low churn rate. The people that work for me are really good people that are really passionate and really committed to the business. I've built that culture, and that definitely makes a difference when people really understand the outcome of everything. The part that I play in this, what does it mean to the wider vision and mission of the business?
That's really interesting as well, because everyone talks about culture, but it's not quite as easy as sort of snapping your fingers and saying we've got good culture here.
Yes.
And the other aspect of that is sort of, and I guess that's the founder's role, but helping people to join the dots, because they may be doing one particularly in almost a siloed part of the role. But in order for them to understand that doing this leads to that, which gives us the biggest outcome. So I guess you've spent a fair amount of time doing that, building culture and helping people understand the mission that they're on.
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely critical. So we've something called Download, which is our weekly update, which we share with everybody in the business. So it's a long email in different sections, which explains what we're working on, what our clients are up to, what we're up to, what's next, what our plans are, and we just share everything. So we're really transparent within the business. We share what's good and we share what's not good, and everybody knows and everybody understands what we've got to do.
I think that's brilliant. I think not enough companies do that. Just share, be open, be transparent, share your wins and your losses when things didn't quite work out. And importantly, what's coming next, from the board or the CEO, whatever, just to let everyone in the organization know. Because everyone needs a sort of a mental framework as to what I'm doing and what the next 6, 12, 18 months might look like in my role and the broader company. So I think anyone who's not doing that, they should take a leaf from your book and probably do that.
And it's important as part of that. AI obviously is a huge subject at the minute, and some employees are quite rightly worried. What does AI mean to my role, my job? So it's something we've been communicating very early on, that AI is a tool. It's going to help you. It's going to improve us as a business, but it's not necessary. It's not about replacing anybody. It's about enabling people to do better.
Absolutely.
And our philosophy in my group of companies is it's not about replacing people, but it's enabling the business to scale much faster and grow more successfully, and enabling my team to be part of that process and become heroes as part of that. So they actually contribute to the growth and success of the business. So one of the things that we are working on at the minute is an employee share scheme. And it's something I've been really passionate about for a couple of years. And it's taken a while to get there. And so as a result of that, the team are actually excited about AI. How do we implement AI to help us grow? Not to replace the job that we've got, but to make it better. And ultimately, this will lead us to scale and grow the business, which they're going to enjoy the benefits of.
I think that's brilliant on a couple of points there, just because it is inevitable that a lot of people will be worried about the job. So communicating with people and say, you don't need to worry, but we do need to keep up to date. We need to embrace this technology, but it's going to make us better, faster, help you at your job. But also, and it's a whole other conversation, I suppose, about creating some sort of ownership mentality in the business as well. So good luck with that. There's some interesting models out there that exist. I want to go back now on the journey. So if I remember correctly, it was Ray at a glass company in St. Albans.
That's correct.
And you're now running it, or running at least part of it. And you, so how did things progress there at that company? What was the next phase?
Well, the challenge that I had, as a now 20-year-old or 21-year-old, is that St. Albans and London's a very expensive place to live. And I couldn't afford to buy somewhere, and I was renting. I did spot a little opportunity. I was renting a what we call a converted garage, which had become a studio apartment of a very successful property developer, a lady who owned lots of property around St. Albans, and this room that I was renting was effectively at the back of her house. The house next door she also owned, and that became available to rent. And I approached her and said, look, I really want to rent this house. And she said, well, Andrew, you can't afford it, you know. And I was earning, pittance then. And I said, well, look, I tell you what, she's an old lady. She was on her own, and I often helped her in the garden, helped her around the house, because I lived at the back of the house. And I said, look, let me have the house, let me rent the house, give me a big discount on it, and in return, I will look after your garden, and I'll look after the house, and look after anything you need. And she said, I'll tell you what, if you come around every Wednesday night and have a little whiskey with me and talk to me, just have a conversation with me for an hour every Wednesday night, you can have the house at a discounted rate. And that's literally what I did for 2 years. And it was incredible, because I suddenly discovered the power of property, and I was in what the youngsters now call rent to rent. So, but this was 35 years ago. So I was able to rent that house at a big discount, and I was then able to rent out 3 of the other rooms, which not only covered the rent, but actually made me a profit equal to how much I was earning in my job at the time. So I ended up doing very well from this transaction. The little old lady benefited. So I kept my word. Every Wednesday I went round, had a chat with her, and I looked after her garden, and just helped her out. So it was a win-win. But ultimately I wanted to own my own house, and in that area, even then you were looking at approaching £1 million. In that particular area, it was Bricket Wood in St Albans. And so I made a decision that I would move up north, where property was much, much cheaper. So I did. I moved to Yorkshire, and I got a job then with another glass company, actually. And that was quite transformational, because the CEO of that business, it was a much larger business, the CEO of that business identified something in me that, and it was really around this work ethic. And that role that I had at that business was going around the country seeing customers. And what was interesting is something that was second nature to me. If I was seeing I'm based in Yorkshire, if I was seeing a customer in London, I would be on the road at 5 o'clock, and I would be at that appointment at 9 a.m. and then I'd spend the day visiting customers. My peers, if you like, the other people doing a similar job, were making that first appointment at 11 o'clock and leaving at 7 a.m. So as a result, my output ended up was significantly higher than other people that were doing the same role who were twice my age. So I ended up in a situation where the managing director of that business ended up closing, or actually exiting a number of the other employees and passing it all over to me. So I started to progress really quickly within that organization until one fateful day. And it was at the Christmas party when I went up to the MD after one or two too many drinks and said, look, I should be sales director of this business. And he said, Andrew, you're 23 years old. You can't be sales director. I said, I can. And the sales director that we've got right now just isn't up to the job. He's lazy. He sits behind the desk, and I could do a better job than he is. On the Monday, I was then called into the office with the sales director, who had been fully relayed this story, who then had my card marked, and that was it. So that was game over. There was no way I was going anywhere.
Right.
Now,
at that point, you knew your time was up. Really,
that's
just a matter of time.
Yeah.
A quick pause. You might not be aware that this podcast is a passion project. It's born from my commitment to supporting entrepreneurs through the business stages of scaling up, selling, and then life on the other side. It's the same work we do at Capital Partners, our boutique wealth planning firm, which is dedicated to helping entrepreneurs to gain clarity around their money, their aspirations, and ultimately achieving financial peace of mind. With over 20 years' experience of working with business owners, our team brings deep insight, strategic thinking, and clarity to what can often be complex decisions. So what you're really looking for is a trusted advisor. Someone who understands people like you and can offer thoughtful guidance at the intersection of business, family, money, and life. In other words, someone to act as your strategic thinking partner and your financial coach. So if that resonates, feel free to explore more. There's a link in the show notes to our website with tools and resources to support you on your journey. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
But that started a career for me where I had developed quite a lot of skill sets at this point. I was then approached actually by one of our customers who said, look, I love what you've done there. Why don't you come and join us? And that actually was quite a pivotal moment for me, because I was then, I think, maybe 24, and I was made a director of that business. And that business became part of a group called IMF Group PLC. And at 25, I was suddenly I found myself as a director of a very significant group of companies. And I applied the same principle to that group of companies as I had everything, which is there are people that are much smarter around me, but nobody will outwork me. And we drove that business really hard, and we grew it very successfully.
It's fascinating just reflecting back on all those various things that happened. There was a series of different events, some of your making, some not of your making.
Yeah.
But it's part of kind of, I guess, life's journey. And there is, you strike me as, I mean, some people would say you got lucky, but you didn't. There was opportunity presented in front of you. And you took action in relation to that opportunity.
I think the other thing, there's this phrase now about being in the room.
Yeah.
And the one thing that, apart from work ethic, the one thing that I always committed to do, no matter what, is show up, no matter what.
Yeah.
It didn't matter if it was the other end of the country and it was a networking event. It didn't matter if it was a brief meeting on the motorway and it would take me 2 hours to get there and a telephone call would have sufficed. No, there's one thing that I've always done, which is, and I tell everybody, always show up, even if you don't want to, even if it's raining, even if it's the other end of the country and you don't want to, and there's something better happening. That's something I've always done, showed up, and that, I think that's the game changer for me.
I think that's the point as well. But if you consistently show up, showing up once isn't going to help, but show up time after time after time at every opportunity, the compound effect of that over time makes all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's another thing that's on my mind. I mentioned, obviously, AI a moment ago. The other thing is, we're a few years the other side now of lockdowns and COVID and what have you, when it seemed to me, obviously, we had no choice. Business carried on, but it was all done over a computer and Zoom and Teams calls and what have you. We now have the opportunity to show up, but I'm noticing a lot of people still would prefer to jump on a Zoom call. And I'm like you, there is no substitute from sitting across a table from somebody, getting in a room, having a cup of coffee or whatever, and having that human-to-human conversation. Clearly, it's done you well over the years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Of course, there's a place for Zoom.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Our culture in our business is that everybody's in the office.
Yeah. Okay.
And we don't particularly support work from home. We have one or two people that work from home because they are further away from the business. But of nearly 100 staff, 90% are in the office every day.
Right.
And it's interesting the impact that that's had, because people are really invested in what we're doing, where we're going. We have, breakfast together. We have lunch together. We have, we've got a lounge in our HQ, which has got a bar in it. And, so after work, people collaborate. We've got games going on. We've got games nights. And so it's more than a business. It's more than a company. And I don't think it's any surprise we've got a very low churn rate of employees. Yeah. And we've got a high employee satisfaction rate. And I think I can definitely see the merit of work from home in some roles and in some situations. But I also see a big disconnect as well, where how can you really immerse yourself in a company's culture and collaboration and camaraderie and friendship and relationships if you're looking at a computer screen?
I completely agree with you. And, we recognize there is this, a number of people prefer to work from home now, but I call it, the kind of the water cooler moments is those unplanned, unsolicited, just bump into somebody or making a cup of tea or something like that. And or you overhear a conversation. Someone says something, you think, oh, that reminds me, I need to speak to you or whatever. There's just these unplanned engagements that you would never have planned a Zoom call for, but they just happen. So I'm all for that. And as you, in your circumstances, it obviously leads through to that strong culture within the organization.
I think there's something I really believe in, and whatever we're doing, whatever the strategy is, whatever direction we're going in my back of my mind is always one thing, which is, what does this mean to my employees, to my team? So what does it mean to them? And I think that's really important. So I think when you put your team at the center of everything that you're doing, it creates magic. So, I'm very fortunate. Our HQ is in a town. It's not in a big city, and that town has got a close-knit community as well. So we've been able to thrive on the back of that as well. So it's created something quite magical. I'm very proud of my team.
Fantastic. And there's something else that you said a moment ago, and I do want to pause on this. All my questions have gone out the window, by the way, because you're saying so many interesting things that I need to just ask you more about. Go back to your little old lady who owned the property, and you having your whiskey with her on a Wednesday night. But just listening to that story, I found it fascinating. And again, I'm trying to relate it to creativity and entrepreneurship. You couldn't afford what she had, she had to sell. Which was that, renting her house. But you found out what she was interested in. So there was, what I take from that is the ability to be creative around putting a deal. That's effectively putting a deal together.
Absolutely.
What really drove her? What was she interested in? What could you do? So looking after the property, doing the garden, meeting her once a week, having a chat, all those other things. That's what she valued. Clearly more than just the money, because if it's just money, she'd go and get someone else to come in. So I think, what are your thoughts on that in terms of, business, entrepreneurship, putting deals together where both parties can win from them?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. One of the books that had the most impact to me in my life was Dr. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the 7 habits is think win-win. And that's something that I absolutely believe in. So it's, there's an exchange of value, and sometimes we don't see the value in what we're doing or the service that we offer, or the product that we offer, but somebody else does. And in that situation, the rent of that house, as it originally stood, was higher than I was earning. So the actual rent was more than I was earning and taking home. And the idea of going to her and saying, look, it was $600 a month back in 86, 87. And I said, look, I want you to rent it to me for $200 a month. And she just laughed. And then she thought about it. And then, I promised to look after the house. I promised to look after her house. And it worked. It was great. It was understanding, she was a multimillionaire. She didn't need the money. So there was less value to the money to her. There was great value to having somebody next door that she could call upon if the lights went off, or if there was a whatever the situation. Knowing that I was next door, I think was really important to her.
I think that's brilliant, and I think there's a lot of lessons in that. It doesn't have to be just what you assume to be sort of an exchange of money or value. As understanding, I love that, and I love the book as well. But always aiming for win-win. But in order to do that, you got to understand what's of value. And you wouldn't necessarily always know without having sort of a back and forth conversation. But once you identify, you probably have an inkling for it in her circumstances and in business terms, what would be really relevant. And I think people can sometimes be surprised because you ended up getting that house for, again, a fraction of what it was worth.
And I think actually there was an element of naivety as well, because there was no agenda with me. I just sat down with her and said, look, I'd love to rent your house next door. And she said, well, you can't afford it. So
how can we find a way of making it happen?
Exactly.
What could be true in order for that for you to be happy, me to be happy? No, I love that. So many lessons within that. Going back to the story, so you're now in this other firm and you're sort of, really progressing far in your career. At what point did you step away from that, or have an idea, this kind of entrepreneurship journey, thinking about maybe I could do this for myself? Was that later on down the line?
Yeah. Well, at this point, we were now running a multiple group of companies, and one of the challenges in that particular business was a conflict between the directors. And so I was a young man at this point. These were all much older than me. And the one thing that I had brought to the table, apart from insane drive and ambition to push everything forward, was I was very good at solving problems, um, and and I got approached regularly by other headhunted, if you like, by other businesses to solve their problems, and I developed a unique ability over a period of time to find really simple solutions to complex problems. So my career, effectively a corporate career, then took off because I was parachuted into or headhunted by a number of organizations over the next few years, and I'd achieved quite a high level of success in working with distressed companies and turning them around. And one of those companies was a company called Cambrian Windows, and they were in West Wales, and I was in Bedfordshire at the time, and it was a distressed business. They were about to collapse, about to go down the pan, and they needed an urgent turnaround. So I went over, met the owners, and realized that there was a great business here, but they had some major problems. One of those was a supplier that were holding them at gunpoint almost. So they said, look, help us turn the business around. And the problem is they couldn't really afford to pay me the money that I was used to earning. So we agreed a deal, really, that I would join them, and with a minimal income, really, just to help me get through, in return for some sort of share deal. And that's what we agreed. Okay. And I then, like I did with previous companies, I absolutely immersed myself in that business. I understood it from the ground up, and it was about $1 million turnover business. It had capacity for much more, but that capacity was constrained by the suppliers and supply chains. So I was able to very successfully pivot that business into a new market, into a new sector. And the business then grew from $1 million to 12 million turnover in about 36 months. Wow. And very profitably. And it was a battle, because we had contractual issues with suppliers, and it was very challenging. It wasn't just a case of how do you scale the business quickly. It was, how do you scale the business quickly when you've got major supplier legal disputes going on and no cash, because the business had run out of cash. So that was a huge challenge, a huge turnaround. So we had to be really innovative. We had to be really creative. We had to go back to, how do you structure a deal with customers to convince them to pay you earlier, and all of these factors. So it's quite a complex arrangement. And while I was building that business, I had an eye on a goal, which was we wanted a 3 to 5 year exit. So I was looking very closely at the stock market, then saying, look, could we potentially float? And I focused heavily on our brand and made sure that brand was put in front of potential trade suitors as well. And eventually that business was sold to Masco, which is a US Fortune 500 company, about 9 billion turnover, and they bought that business.
That's a great success story.
Yeah, it was a huge success story. The growth of the business, the profitability, and the brand. And I think it was particularly satisfying because of what was going on behind the scenes that nobody would see. That huge battle with a supplier that was trying to hold the company to ransom, and all of these challenges. The business had run out of cash, so we had to push into markets where customers would prepay or pay early. So it was fraught with challenges, and it was in West Wales, as far West Wales as you could get, and all of our customers were in London or Southeast. So that brought other logistical problems as well.
I sometimes think that constraints can be good if you have no choice. In that business, there wasn't a lot of money around. There was, as you said, a whole range of issues and challenges, but it doesn't have forced creativity. We have to solve this.
Yes.
there must be a solution to it.
That's 100% right, Alan. I think it's something I really believe in is burn the bridges, and just go either do or don't do. Don't talk about it. Don't faff around. Don't say I'll do it up to this level just in case. Either just immerse yourself in it. So whatever I've done career-wise, business-wise, it's been total immersion, total commitment, a fanatical passion to make things happen, and actually that has shaped that. Those early days actually shaped what I've become later on, and helped me build frameworks and repeatable strategies that would help me in my later career.
Well, I'd like to talk about that now, Andrew, because it's interesting listening to your story then, because when the point came, you said we should plan for a 3 to 5 year exit. So all of a sudden, that, I guess, gives you a lot of focus. We're not just trying to sort of grow a bit over the next few years. And I think this is something that I come across when people come on this podcast, clients of ours, people that I know, is just getting really clear what the ambition is. You either got to be building for an exit and you operate in that way, or you're not. It's more of a lifestyle type business and it throws off a bit of income, which is perfectly fine as well.
Yeah.
But would you agree with that? Just be crystal clear about what the ambition of the organization is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I developed an entire framework around this called Perplex,
right?
Which is PURPLEX, and it's an acronym. So it stands for Purpose, Plan, Execute. And that is a methodology that I developed that I apply to absolutely every business I talk to, every business that I work with, and every business that I own. In fact, that Purpose, Plan, Execute, Perplex actually became the name of my company that I launched in 2004.
Okay.
And that business went from just me to 100 plus people and working with over 1,000 businesses. And we developed and implement that framework with everybody that we work with.
So, okay, so tell me more. Obviously, you began to shape this framework during your time at this organization, which you built up and scaled and sold.
Yeah.
But if anyone is tuning into this, watching and listening to this podcast, who's running a business right now, I guess all those lessons you learned and the framework, what are the kind of the headlines that you'd be telling somebody that's running a business and is planning to grow and scale?
Yeah.
Share with us your thoughts about what that framework actually looks like.
Yeah. Well, that framework, Perplex, Purpose, Plan, Execute, I think that very often in a business you lose track of what your outcomes are going to be. You lose track of what your purpose is. Quite often you set up a business out of a passion and you can see an opportunity in a market, but you end up quite at the start you might say, this is where I want to get to, this is what I want to build, but actually as you are immerse yourself in the business, you very often lose focus on that. So one of the things that I say to every business, and there's two elements to purpose. One is what the corporate purpose is. Where do you want to get your business? What does it look like in 3 years' time? What are the numbers? Who are the customers? What is your employee setup? What are your offices? Where's your distribution network? So be absolutely clear on what it looks like in 3 years' time and 5 years' time. That's the purpose, absolute purpose. And what customers do we serve? What are we trying to achieve with it? So have absolute clarity around where you want to be 3 to 5 years. So that's purpose. But equally, the founders of that business need to have their own purpose. And that purpose is the why. Why am I building this? What do I want to achieve? And why is this important to me? So when you have a business purpose, clarity in where you're going, what it looks like in detail, what's the color on the walls almost, but that type of detail. And then you attach that to the why of the founder. That's when magic happens, because I think very often business owners give up too early, and they get despondent. They have failings. They have they're not reaching the numbers. They're not making money, and it's much harder than they thought. When you have absolute clarity of purpose, where you're going as a business, and you have personal clarity of purpose, which is why you're doing with it, then you become, I think you become unstoppable. Doesn't matter what comes your way. And definition of business to me is overcoming problems, solving other people's problems. So I think the first bit is purpose. the next element of it is the plan, which is the strategy. How are you going to deliver that? What is the 1 year strategy, the 2 year strategy, the 3 year strategy to achieve that? And then the bit that I think gets missed a lot is execution.
Yeah.
And, and execution quite often is where it'll fall down, which is, I know what I want to do, I know how to do it, but I'm not actually doing it. So that framework that I developed, that was I developed it theoretically over many years, but I brought it together in a very fateful day, Alan, which in one particular day. And I mentioned we had built Cambrian very successfully. The business sold to Masco. I then had the opportunity to look to buy another business that was part of the same group. And this business had been losing a lot of money. And I had the opportunity to take that business over for very low cost, but it required a lot of funding. And I had now had a stellar career, corporate career. We built a huge company very successfully. We've grown from 1 million to 12 million in 3 years very successfully. And if I'm completely honest with you, my ego got in the way. And I thought I could do anything. I was an expert at distressed businesses. I was an expert at scale-up businesses. Taking over this small £3 million a year business and turning it around and making it profitable. Of course, I could do that.
It's going to be easy for you.
Easy. Yeah. And I acquired that business in, I think it was May 2001. And then something very fateful happened in September 2001, which was 9/11. And that was, the business I had bought was a luxury retail home improvement company. And we had, it was already a distressed business. Come 9/11, the phone went off like a tap, just gone. Nobody was inquiring. Nobody wanted high-end home improvement extensions. And the business literally went from, hundreds of inquiries to almost zero, because 9/11,
there's so much uncertainty.
Yeah,
people just said, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to spend any money because I don't know what's going to happen now.
The war on terror begun. So I made a decision. There was 2 challenges. One was that challenge. The second one was that I hadn't done enough due diligence when I bought the business, and I hadn't looked into a lot of historical issues. And one of those, which is very pertinent for later, one of those was the building that we were in. And it was a large building owned by a pension fund, and I knew the lease was up in 2 years. What I hadn't realised was the implications of that, and costs of dilapidations and costs of legal fees relating to big property transactions. So, but at this point, I thought, look, I've acquired this business, I funded it, 9/11's happened, it's decimated the business, but I'm not going to walk away. I'm going to keep funding it and keep funding it and keep funding it and keep funding it until it turns around again. And I did.
Were you self-funding?
I self-funded.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of the capital that you'd made from the previous
and that was disappearing by the day.
Rapidly, yeah.
And it got to the point and I literally kept that business afloat for 2 years. And as my own cash was running out, I was now in too deep. And I went to the bank and I got some bank support as well. Not a lot, but some bank support. And then that business finally crashed and burned when the landlord in the building told us they weren't renewing our lease and sent us a claim for dilapidations, which was so ridiculous that we couldn't even dispute it, and it just ended in total catastrophe. So I had gone in the space of 2.5 years from being very successful, stellar career, to acquiring a business that had everything thrown at it, from 9/11 to major battle with a pension fund over dilapidations, to losing all my own money into it. And I lost that business. The bank then called in a personal guarantee, which I hadn't really understood to the level that I was signing it. It was just one piece of paper in a big bundle. And I had missed the I knew it was there, but I didn't realize the implications of it. So it ended up being a domino effect. And so in 2004, in April 2004, I went from successful to losing everything, including losing my home. And I ended up with over £100,000 in credit card debt and no income. And I literally, I had a clapped out old BMW at the time, which I had to buy because my company car had to go. And I ended up sat on the beach in Weston-super-Mare in this clapped out old BMW, thinking, that's it, life's over. I've lost everything. I'm humiliated. I'm a failure. How could this possibly happen? Felt sorry for myself. And the trigger point came that I sat there and I thought about my two sons. I had two young boys, 11 and 6. And I thought, what example am I setting here? I can't allow this to define who I am. I can't allow this to hold me back. So I sat there and I thought, look, I'm going to show those boys that you can be successful, you can overcome failure, you can bounce back. So I sat there and thought, okay, I'm in debt, I've lost everything. I'm now in this horrible little 2-bedroom flat with bunk beds, tiny little room bunk beds for my two boys. And I thought, look, okay, what can I do now? What can I actually do? And I thought, well, I'm really good at growing businesses. I'm really good at turnarounds. I'm really good at scaling companies. And maybe the time now is not to go into a business and turn it around. Maybe it's time I set up to teach other people and show other people how to do it and support other businesses. So I really, at that point, came up with Perplex. I sat down there and thought, look, what makes a business successful? And I looked at all the businesses that I'd worked with. And what I realized is that my successes were when I had clear purpose, clear plan, very good execution. And when my business had failed, I realized I had total lack of clarity, no idea of purpose. I was literally in survival mode every day. I had no plan. Just to get through the day, and I had no execution. So I ended up thinking about this, thinking purpose, plan, execute. And I took those three elements, and that day Perplex was born, which was 22 years ago. And I launched Perplex literally on that beach on that day, and I went round the country in that old BMW, touting myself as somebody that could go in and help you get your business on track and avoid the mistakes that I had made as well. And that actually took off, and I was brought in as a consultant to a number of great businesses, and then that led to me developing a business that then went from just me to 100 people, and spinning out several other businesses, and building a 70 million revenue business, but lots of scars along the way.
Wow. Hi, just a quick pause. If you're getting value from this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit subscribe and leave a rating or a review. It's honestly the best way to support the show, to help more people find it, and to make sure that future episodes get even better based on your feedback. Thanks for being here, and now back to the show.
What a story. Thanks so much for sharing that, because it's interesting. You clearly, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but you enjoyed great success. But I've often heard it say that as much as success is enjoyable, and it's great and it's fun, that the biggest lessons are learned through failure. I guess you'd agree with that. You had to really reassess everything, because success isn't necessarily a great teacher. You don't necessarily know how you achieve success. You assume it was because of your genius and brilliance, but maybe we got lucky. Maybe we made a few decisions right, but failure you find out pretty quickly.
And failure is a hard taskmaster. It very much humbled me, and my ego disappeared very, very, very quickly. And it helped shape me hugely, and it taught me to be razor sharp, not to take anything for granted, check everything, check the detail as well. But I think more than anything, that what I realize is that it's only a moment in time, and that, and I've spoke to a lot of people now, a lot of entrepreneurs who are facing really tough times at the minute. It's been a tough year or two. And I'm speaking to a lot of entrepreneurs who are highly stressed, working around the clock, trying to keep their businesses afloat and drive things forward. And I've met several who are almost desolate. They are facing, really tough decisions. And what I would say to any entrepreneur out there, business is not a straight line. It's a curve. Sometimes you're up and sometimes you're down. And understand that all of it is only a moment in time. And when you do fail, and we'll all fail at some point, and when you do fail, that's not the end. And for me, actually, if I hadn't had that failure, I wouldn't have built what I've built now. And bizarrely as it sounds, I'm almost glad for that failure, because what I do now, I absolutely love doing. Marketing, software, tech, supporting other entrepreneurs, really giving back, and building a great media company, and having the opportunity to meet some of the most successful business people on the planet. And none of that would have happened if I hadn't had that failure 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, looking back at it now with hindsight, you are where you are, probably largely as a result of that experience. But in the moment, it's not enjoyable. And I think that's the message. And I agree with you. And I know quite a number of people as well who are going through challenging times. That it's a tough economy out there. But the phrase is, "This too shall pass." It doesn't last forever. The good times don't last forever either, necessarily.
Yeah, and it's hard. Don't. It's hard to see that when you're in the moment.
Yes, exactly.
Because all you can see is all the fires around you, the stress, the calls, the emails, the messages, the letters. Customers, suppliers, employees, and sometimes it can be really overwhelming. But as you said, this too shall pass. And there's always another day tomorrow. There's always another sunset and another sunrise. So just keep going.
What would you say? I just want to just pause on this for a moment. What would you say to those people who are going through that at the moment? Just if they're listening in or tuning into this, going through, should they speak to others? Should they speak to others in their situation?
Yeah, I think there's never been a time like it when entrepreneurs feel lonely and isolated. And I think more now than ever, you should be getting involved in networking events, getting involved in less networking events, but masterminds, peer groups, working with others.
Yeah, others mentors, who are going through the same as you. They may have just been through it. They may be going through it as well, but there's no one else that can relate to you like another founder, another entrepreneur. We know there's some fantastic business coaches out there, but unless you've got the battle scars, you've lived it, you've breathed it,
absolutely,
you can really relate. So I'm a big fan of that as well. Network groups, just sort of mentoring groups, mastermind groups, whatever you want to call them. Just we're back to that thing. Get out, sit in the same room as other people.
Human contact,
human to human.
And you always learn. There's always a takeaway. And sometimes you see other people who are in a worse position than you are, and you think, my goodness, okay, maybe it's not that bad. And sometimes you'll pick up tips or advice, and sometimes it's just a case of being able to share what you're going through to help you clarify to yourself. As a business owner, it's very hard to turn around to your employees and say, "No, I'm really stressed at the minute. I don't know if I can pay everybody at the end of the month."
Doesn't work.
You're gonna have mass panic. So who do you share that with? You can't share it with your bank.
No.
Maybe your spouse, but they're not necessarily connected to the business. So sharing that and those experiences with other entrepreneurs.
I think there's a lot of value in just getting it off your chest, just speaking aloud to other people who get it and understand it. And in some ways, you almost begin to solve the problems by saying it aloud. It stops being sort of buzzing around in your head the whole time.
Yeah.
And say it aloud, get a bit of candid feedback from others. That's hugely valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So tell me, so this is Perplex, the company. So tell me about the sort of shape of the company now, what it does, and what sort of clients you work with.
Yeah, well, Perplex is today it's less consultancy, although I still do consultancy through Perplex. It kind of evolved really from really a consultancy business on strategy. I think one of the challenges I had over the years was I worked with lots of marketing agencies, and I found them all quite fluffy.
Yeah,
and they're run by marketing people and creatives, which is wonderful. But everything that I wanted to do was about distressed turnarounds or taking a great business and scaling it fast. And so, and I couldn't find the agencies that really understood that. So when I launched Perplex, it originally started as a consultancy business on strategy. And then it evolved really into, I would say, more of a growth consultancy, marketing-led growth consultancy. But it's about strategy. It's about where you are today and where you want to get to, and then what are the strategies to help you do that, purpose, plan, execute. And there is a formula for scaling any business, and we've developed a whole range of frameworks that we apply to businesses, and they do create that growth. So, and I enjoy that immensely. So I enjoy, I was with one of our clients just before Christmas, who's grown from 6 million to 25 million, just completed on an exit. And we went out to Manchester for the most outrageous night out to celebrate that success. So that's what we do, and that's what I do. And then that spun out other businesses. It spun out a software business called salestracker.com. It spun out a media company, Business Leader magazine, which then went on to become the #1 media business in the UK for entrepreneurs. That was actually just a spin out and just scaled up. And then because of the experience that I had a few years earlier with the dilapidations claim, I made a decision that I would never rent again, that I would always own the properties that my businesses would occupy. And that ended up creating another spin-out business, which was a property management business. And that ended up, through that business, I ended up buying multiple premises that my different businesses would then occupy. So that then ended up turning into, multi-million property business. That then spun out a property maintenance and development business that now, carries out maintenance and property development. So
that whole creative entrepreneurship streak just continues to run right through.
So it's always, whenever I look at any business, it's how do I scale? And you can scale directly and organically, or you can scale by bolting on high value solutions to the side of that. And always looking at, if I've got a supplier and I'm spending so much money with the supplier, my question is, well, why don't I own the supplier?
Yeah.
So I'll either look to the supplier and say, look, I want to acquire you, or I will launch a similar business. So that's how I've scaled everything. The media business opened my eyes to that as well, because through that Business Leader magazine, I was able to connect with people that would just open so many doors and made me realize what is possible out there, Alan. So that was quite an incredible experience building that business.
But you sold that business, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah. I did in 2023. So I launched Business Leader. It was originally a spin-out media business, a magazine for entrepreneurs, and it took a couple of years to gain some traction, but it started to gain some successes, and we started to realize that celebrities and business celebrities were coming to us, and they wanted to be in the magazine, and they wanted to be in front cover of the magazine. The dragons, the high profile, John Caldwell, the billionaire, and can I be in your magazine? Can I be in the front cover? And and we realized we had something there which was really, really special. So the magazine gained traction, and became very successful. On the back of that, we then hosted some big events. So we launched the Business Leader Awards. We launched the Go Tech Awards for the tech industry, and then we launched the Scale Up Awards, which was the flagship event. And I partnered with Amazon for that, and HSBC and London Stock Exchange Group. So we ended up building this network around us, and as part of that, we would have judges, and every major awards event that we had a series of judges, and those judges were the likes of Theo Paphitis, or very high profile and very successful and entrepreneurial business people. One of those was Richard Harpin, was one of our judges, and Richard was CEO of a company called HomeServe at the time, and him and I met a number of times. He came along to our launch events, became one of our judges, and I got to know him. We then had dinner. He spoke at some of my other events, and we built a relationship. He then sold HomeServe in 2023 for 4.1 billion to a Canadian firm. And then I got a call from him saying, look, I want to buy Business Leader. Okay. And I said, well, it's not for sale. Right. But he was persuasive.
Okay. The price is right.
Yeah. And, he came along, we met, he loved the magazine. He loved what we were doing. Right. And so, he then said, look, I want to buy the business. We were in WH Smith at the time. The magazine was everywhere. And then I sat down with his team, and we thrashed out a deal. I rejected it. We went back to the table. We renegotiated, and then finally got a deal that worked for both parties. But it was interesting because when you build a company with a plan of exiting, which is what you should always do, always build it to exit, even if you don't exit. One of the most powerful things as a marketeer is the power of brand. And when you've got a business that's got huge brand value to it, it changes the outcome in terms of the valuation of the business. So with Business Leader, we secured a 32x EBITDA multiple, wow. Which is obviously a very, very high multiple. But when you're looking at that, the buyer isn't buying the numbers, they're buying the brand and what that business can do for them. Yeah. So it's back to that story all those years earlier with the house, renting the house. It's understanding the value something has to the buyer. So in my case, it was the brand of Business Leader. Yeah. So we completed that deal. I stayed on as chairman. So, I got to know Richard, highly astute businessman, and, a hugely successful entrepreneur, and somebody we should probably all aspire to be like.
Absolutely. I was with him recently. He has agreed to come on this podcast as a future guest, so we'll get his side of the story. Yes. But I'm sure I know you're still good friends with Richard as well. So incredible story, and so many lessons here. Honestly, I'm conscious of your time, but we have to have you back again, because we didn't really unpack all the detail about the frameworks. That's a whole other episode by itself. Yeah. As we're kind of winding towards the close, because the time has flown, but I'd just like to just throw a couple of more things at you before we wrap up. You mentioned a book, which I've read as well, and you just reminded me I need to go and read it again, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Yeah. Other than that, have there been any other resources, books or magazines or podcasts or anything that you found helpful on your own personal journey?
I'm going to share something with you now, which is slightly embarrassing and slightly wonderful at the same time. A few months ago, I was clearing out my loft, and I found a taped up cardboard box, and I didn't know what it was, so I decided to open it. And in there is a big box, and it was full of old cassettes. Remember the old tape cassettes from
of course
30 years ago? Yeah. And I opened this box and I looked through it, and I thought, my goodness, there is Michael Gerber's E-Myth book on cassette. Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, Tony Robbins,
all the greats,
all the greats. And I brought it down from the loft and I looked at these, and there's over 100 tapes here.
Yeah.
And so I went on eBay and I bought a old cassette player that converted it into digital. And to answer your question, what I realized is there hasn't been any one or two particular books, but in my early 20s, I didn't have money, I didn't have connections, I had a work ethic. But the one thing that I knew was I needed to get educated, and I didn't do well at school because of what happened in my childhood. So I knew I needed education. I knew I needed to learn, but I didn't have the money to go to big seminars. And so what I did do is I immersed myself in those tapes when I was in my early 20s. So I read all the books, the Zig Ziglar books, the E-Myth, all those. So I immersed myself in business speakers and motivational speakers, and I hadn't realized the impact that would then go on to have for the rest of my life. So the one thing that I would say is keep learning, keep reading, and I'll be releasing my book over the next few months, so stay in touch, and I'll share a copy with you.
Yeah, we will do. We'll have you back on again to talk about the book. So you've got a book about your journey, your story, and the lessons that you've learned.
That's it.
Well, that's an essential purchase for everyone who wants to grow and learn from your experiences.
It's interesting, I've built a number of very successful companies myself. But I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of other entrepreneurs over the years, and also through Business Leader, I ended up connecting into a network of thousands upon thousands of entrepreneurs, and I started to see some patterns.
Right.
And we're having 300 or 400 applications for the Scale Up Awards or the Business Leader Awards. So I'm the chief judge. So I'm looking at all these award entries. I'm looking at all these companies that are doing extraordinarily well, and you start to see patterns. So I think my book really is a reflection of that. What are those patterns of those really successful businesses?
Yeah, that's incredible. As they say, success leaves clues.
Yes,
you can
absolutely.
see every business is different. Every founder and entrepreneur is different, but they've got recurring themes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that way, if you've distilled all that down into a book, then that's got to be essential reading for everyone else. I've got one more question for you. You've had this incredible success. You've had from a very challenging start. Let's face it. And I'm just imagining, it was a brutal time sitting in your beat up BMW on the beach in Weston-super-Mare. I guess that was one of the lows of your life. But you are who you are now, Andrew. But looking back, I often talk about, I run a wealth management business. I try to identify what wealth means to the people that come on here. What's your personal definition of true wealth?
That's a great question. Just before I answer this, or what will help answer that, is that I had a bizarre event 9 months or a year ago. And that event was that I was driving down a particular street, and in front of me, I spotted that old BMW.
No, really? The one
from 22, 23 years ago.
Wow.
Now, I drove around the country in that old BMW until eventually the engine blew up, and I had to pay somebody £50 to take it away for scrap 18 years ago, 19 years ago. So here I am driving down the road, and I spot this car in front of me, and I know it's my car because it's got an Irish number plate on it. So I finally flagged down the driver, and this old guy, and turns out he had bought the car 17 years ago from the scrap dealer, had the engine rebuilt, and he'd been driving it for 17 years, and it's now got 335,000 miles on the clock.
Wow.
And I said to him, I want to buy back this car. And he said, well, it's not for sale. So I get his contact details, and I stay in touch with him. And a couple of months go by, and he rings me up, and he said, okay, I'm finally ready to sell you this car, but I want a lot of money for it. So I bought the car off him, parked at my drive, and I realized what an absolute garbage. This it was bad enough 20 years ago, but he had chickens living in the back of it.
Oh.
The car was held together by sticky tape, but I sat in that car, and all those memories from 22 years ago came flooding back when I felt a complete failure. And I sat there now as a multimillionaire, huge, really successful group of companies, working with thousands of entrepreneurs. And I realized that, that the key to that was to, no matter what happens to you, there's always a new tomorrow. You're always going to bounce back. So I ended up having that car fully restored completely. So it's virtually a brand new car now, and it sits outside my office for people to come and sit and, discuss, their challenges. So
what an incredible story. It's just what that car represents is the point, is the moment
exactly
in your life that it was just, it couldn't get any worse.
Yeah.
And look at you now. And to have that, what an incredible coincidence again to see that. It's the fate
insane
that you see this car and then you buy it. And of course, as you've always done, it's just finding a deal that works for both parties. He didn't want to sell, keep in touch, but eventually the time was right that he did.
I did stalk him a little bit.
Okay.
There was posts to find out where he
you
lived.
had to have that car, whatever it took. You were going to get it. Yeah.
So, that to me is that's to me what wealth and success is all about. It doesn't matter what happens to you. You learn from it, you move on. And actually there is a new tomorrow, and, bounce back, keep going, build again, and enjoy, and actually enjoy the process more than anything.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's another incredible story. This has been a brilliant conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and there's a lot of value, a lot of insight for the audience. So, but for now, thank you very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Alan. Thanks for having me on.